All right, so this is going to be section 7.4. So now we're actually going to start doing the adding and subtracting, but they're not going to have common denominators like they did in the first few examples for 7.3. We're going to do this video in two parts. So just know that I'm going to stop in the middle and then I will start a next video. So before we actually get into the adding and subtracting like we do in example 2, let's just once again practice finding the lowest common denominator, which, by the way, is the same as the least common multiple. It means the exact same thing. So in other words, I want the smallest expression that both of these expressions divide into evenly. So if we look at 1a, and we practiced this already in section 7.3, if I want the least common multiple, which again, I'm going to tell you is the lowest common denominator, they are the same thing. So if I look at just the numbers, the 5 and the 15, what is the smallest number that 5 and 15 divide into evenly? Well, that's going to be 15. Now let's take the variables. Well, I need an A and I need a B. And remember from 7.3, you need the highest exponent that appears on them. So if I look at my A, here I have an A squared, here I have an A to the 5th. I need the highest exponent. So there we go. And if I look at my B, here I have a B cubed, and here I have a B to the 1st, which means I need the exponent to be a 3 because you take the highest number. So my lowest common denominator, which again is the same thing as my least common multiple for these two expressions, would be 15 A to the 5th B cubed. Well, let's look at B, and then I'm going to have you do C on your own. So if I look at B, I look at these expressions, and I see that they both factor. So that's the first thing that you're always going to want to do. So if I factor this first binomial, I see that I can factor an x out, which would leave me with x plus 5. Why don't you pause the video and go ahead and factor the second expression and then come back and make sure you've done it correctly. So here I have a trinomial, so I'm simply going to backwards FOIL. I need to split up the x squared, so x, and now I need two numbers that multiply together to get -10 and add together to get +3. So that's going to be a +5 and a -2. So now that those are factored, we can find our least common multiple or lowest common denominator. Well, I need to have an x because I need this to divide into it evenly. I need an x plus 5. What else do I need in my LCD? I need an x minus 2. Again, think of it like this. Everything in each of these has to be covered somewhere in my LCD so that each of these expressions will divide into my LCD evenly. Everything is now covered. This is my lowest common denominator. All right, so let's do C in stages. The first thing I want you to do for C is go ahead, pause the video, and factor all three of these expressions, and then come back and check to make sure you've factored them correctly. All right, so you're back. I'm going to go ahead and factor. So this first expression, each one of them is just going to be backwards FOIL. So we'll have an x, and then what multiplies together to get -12 and adds together to get a +4. Well, that would be a +6 and a -2. Now let's go ahead and do the second trinomial. Again, backwards FOIL. So we'll have an x and an x. I need two numbers that multiply together to get -30, but add together to get a +1. So that's going to be +6 and -5. And then over here, again, I need to factor. So I'm going to backwards FOIL. So I'm going to have, again, x, and I need two numbers that multiply together to get -24 and add together to get +2. So it's going to be a +6 and a -4. So now that we have it all factored correctly, let's build our least common multiple or lowest common denominator. Let's start at the left here. So I need an x plus 6. I need an x minus 2. So I'm just going to go from left to right. I don't need another x plus 6 because I already have one. I need an x minus 5. I already have the x plus 6. I don't need that. But I need an x minus 4. And there is my lowest common denominator or least common multiple. And again, you can kind of check it. Is everything in this first expression covered somewhere in here? Absolutely. Is everything in the second expression covered somewhere in there? Yes, it is. And same thing with the third. Everything's covered. All right, so now let's start putting this into practice. So the first thing you're always going to want to do is to find my lowest common denominator. So I have 5x and I have 3x. They are not the same. So, well, if I look at the 5 and the 3, what's the smallest number that both 5 and 3 divide into evenly? That's going to be 15. And then what else do I need as part of my LCD? I need an x. That is my lowest common denominator. So now take very careful notes because here's what I want you to do with that, and it's going to take some steps. I want you to rewrite the first fraction, x plus 2 over 5x. Now, I want to make this denominator look like the LCD. So I want to change this into this. What is missing? What will I have to multiply by? Well, do you see where I would have to multiply this denominator here by 3 to make it look like that? So what that tells me is I'm going to multiply top and bottom of the fraction by 3. Now you're going to rewrite the second fraction, and you're going to do the same thing. What am I missing? What do I have to multiply this denominator by to make it look like my lowest common denominator? Well, I have to multiply it by 5. You need to write that step. It's really important. It will help you. So now what you're going to do is you're actually going to multiply these denominators out. Well, I have 3 times x plus 2. And I'm just not going to multiply quite yet. I'm just going to write it like that. Plus, now I'm going to have to multiply these. So I'm going to have 5 times 6x plus 3. And that's all going to go over my common denominator, which in both cases you can see is now 15x. So now let's go ahead and let's distribute. So we're going to have 3x plus 6 plus 30x plus 15 all over 15x. All right, so I'm running out of room, so I'm going to kind of go up here. If I combine my like terms, I'm looking at 33x plus 21 all over 15x. Okay, so I have now added those two fractions, but you have to see if you can reduce your answer, which is what we did in 7-1. So remember, reducing means you're going to factor and cancel. Is there any way I can factor this numerator? Absolutely. It has a greatest common factor of 3. So you're going to have to take that out, and when you take that out, you're left with 11x plus 7. And that's going to go over 15x. Do you see now I can cancel this 3 into this 15. So this 3 disappears. And I'm going to be left with a 5 downstairs here. So I'm going to have 11x plus 7 all over 5x for my answer for 2A. It's a lot of work. It's even more work trying to figure out if it reduces, but you've got to go ahead and you've got to do that. Okay, so that's the process you want to use. So now let's go ahead and let's look at B. So the first thing we have to do is we have to find our lowest common denominator. Well, hopefully you notice that this denominator factors. You should always do that first. So this is a difference of squares. It's x plus 2 times x minus 2. So now, what's my lowest common denominator? Well, I'm going to need an x minus 2. And I'm going to need an x plus 2 so that everything is there. So here we go. Here's that long step. Rewrite the first fraction. What am I going to have to multiply top and bottom by to make this denominator look like my lowest common denominator? Well, what's missing? What's missing is an x plus 2. Now, the nice thing for this one is when I go ahead and rewrite the second fraction with the factored denominator, by the way, this is already over the common denominator, so I don't have to multiply top and bottom by anything. I'm good to go. All right, so here we go. Now it's time to actually multiply x times x plus 2. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to distribute right here. And I'm going to get x squared plus 2x. And then it's plus a negative 8, which is the same thing as minus 8, all over my common denominator of x minus 2 times x plus 2. So I've combined the fractions. But now the question is, does it reduce? Can I factor the numerator so that something in the denominator may cancel? Well, let's see. Does this numerator factor? It looks like it to me. So you're going to have an x and an x. Are there two numbers that multiply together to get negative 8, but add together to get positive 2? Yes, there are. There are plus 4 and minus 2. And that goes over my common denominator still of x plus 2 times x minus 2. Notice the x minus 2's will cancel. So we're left with an answer of x plus 4 over x plus 2. All right, I'm kind of looking. Let's do one more example before we go to the next video. So this, notice, is a subtraction problem, so that's going to add a little bit of extra problem for us. So again, we have to find the lowest common denominator. Oops, I'm going to erase that. I don't like where I put it. But first, to do that, we have to factor the first denominator. So x squared minus 9 will factor into x plus 3 times x minus 3. The second denominator doesn't factor. So what is my LCD going to be? Well, we're going to need an x plus 3, and we're going to need an x minus 3. So let's rewrite this first fraction, 10 over x plus 3 times x minus 3. Now notice for this one, it is already over the common denominator, so we don't have to do any multiplication. Let's rewrite the second fraction, minus 5 over x minus 3. Now, this one is going to need some tweaking. What do I have to multiply this denominator by that's going to make it look like the LCD? Well, that's going to be x plus 3, and I have to multiply the top by x plus 3 as well. All right. So now, here we go. This first fraction, we're going to leave as it is. Now, this one right here, so minus, and now we have to distribute 5x plus 15 over x minus 3 times x plus 3. Now, when you're subtracting, we're going to have to take this and we're going to have to change the signs over here. It's, again, like kind of multiplying through by negative 1. So this is going to turn into plus a negative 5x and a negative 15. If we go ahead and combine like terms, I'm seeing negative 5x, And then 10 and negative 15 is going to be minus 5. And that's all over x plus 3 times x minus 3. So, does this reduce? Well, I can factor a negative 5 out of the top. So let's go ahead and do that. If I factor a negative 5, that's going to give me a positive x plus 1. Is that going to help me at all? Does this factor cancel with either of those? It doesn't. So I would accept either one of those answers as your final answer. All right, and we're going to go over to part 2.